Welcome to the In Chamber, the place where we focus on the issues and people that shape business success. I'm your co-host, Rebecca Patrick. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications for the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. Joining me at the microphone is Anthony Shutley, our Director of Communications. In Chamber is presented by the Talent Resource Navigator. Today, we're chatting with Tyler Foxworthy, an Indianapolis native, Southport High School and Purdue alum, who's well known for applying mathematics to solve challenging business problems. His first professional job was with Indigo Bioautomation, where he helped create algorithms for medical device software. In 2013, Foxworthy went to KSM Consulting to become Chief Data Scientist and Practice Director. Foxworthy later worked at Indianapolis-based marketing technology firm DemandJump before starting his own company, Vertex Intelligence, which was recently acquired by another Hoosier tech firm, Greenlight Guru. Tyler, thank you for talking with us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. We'll jump in and get started. So you're a chief data scientist, and you've been involved in that field for a number of years. Explain sort of what you do and why it's important and how that field has really evolved in the last 5 or 10 years.
Sure. So, at a really high level, I think about what I do as turning business problems into math problems, and then figuring out how to translate those back into practical business solutions, usually using technology and software, but sometimes it's doing statistical analysis or algorithm development. So and that's this intersection of practical business applications and math has really been something that has always interested me and kept me really engaged in the tech community and the business community for the last 10 or so years. So so it's a lot of fun. In terms of like how the field has evolved, thinking back 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have all the cloud computing infrastructure that we have today. It's so the ability to do these things, to turn a business problem into a math problem and use algorithms in a practical way was a whole heck of a lot harder, because from an IT perspective and infrastructure perspective, it was much more expensive, much more difficult to figure out how to get something going. Now, anybody with a good idea and a MacBook Pro and Wi-Fi can kind of hit the ground running pretty quickly. So I think the barrier to entry has been lowered. There is a greater level of abstraction of a lot of the really technical difficult components that also makes it easier to be more productive. But I think that's been a really positive change. And in addition to that, there's also just been a growing awareness in the business community that these techniques work, that they do drive value. Originally, I think a lot of this was originated in the marketing tech industry in the early web industries, because it was motivated by a need to solve competitive problems. They needed to figure out how to make more money from ads, right? And so a lot of that drove the adoption of mathematical models, which could pick up on subtle purchasing patterns, demographic patterns, things like that, in order to more effectively target advertising at really internet scale. And so the kind of like how in the NASA, the early NASA era, where a lot of technical innovations were later adopted in the broader by the broader business community, as well as just society in general. I think that's kind of what's happened here within business, and for the purposes of data science and AI adoption, is that it started there and then has trickled down and permeated through the rest of industry.
I was wondering if you could take us on a little bit of a journey of how you get from identifying maybe the problem and how you get the mathematics working to sort of solve that. If you could give us sort of an example how that plays out.
Yeah. So the way that it generally plays out is that most of these problems that one encounters. So let's say it was a customer segmentation problem, or an ad targeting problem, or a budget optimization, scheduling optimization. A lot of these problems beneath the surface actually fall into a handful of really common buckets. And so you don't necessarily have to be a domain expert in a particular business area to start to pick out I call them the smells of of problems, right? That there's these characteristics of, of problems that if you learn to listen and you learn to look at what are the constraints, what are the business constraints, what type of data is available, that typically you start to get pretty good at mapping those real world problems into these sort of handful of, canonical examples. And so you do that, and then, work out you have to validate those solutions. And then ultimately you come back with a set of conclusions, or you develop a piece of software that ultimately implements that.
I mentioned earlier, you recently sold your company, Vertex Intelligence, to Indianapolis-based Greenlight Guru, which makes a software platform that I believe helps medical device firms bring their products to market faster.
That's right.
Why was joining Greenlight Guru a good fit for you and for your company?
That was wonderful. We had worked with Greenlight Guru in a partnership capacity for the better part of 3 years. That partnership resulted in multiple patents, and really there were just so many interesting open problems in that medical device space, and not a lot of competition. And so between that and then just having a wonderful relationship with the team and loving the mission of the company, something that our CEO David Duran likes to say is that that the company's got soul. And I think that really matters a lot. And so, when the opportunity arose after the major investment through JMI, which is a growth equity firm out of San Diego, when that happened last year, then they came to us and basically said like, "Hey, we want to do a lot more of what we're doing together." So, so it really just all fell into place from there.
There's been a lot of debate about what will make Indiana, and Central Indiana in particular, a strong tech ecosystem. Some say having long-term standalone tech firms is critical, while others think it's really okay for Hoosier tech startups to sprout up and be sold off to bigger, sometimes out-of-state firms. What mix do you think makes for a healthy tech ecosystem here in Indiana?
Well, I'm personally of the opinion that, the companies that start here, grow here, stay here, plant deep roots, foster the sort of tight-knit community of alumni that breeds future success. There's really a flywheel effect there, right? That, as these companies grow, they exit, there's a liquidity event, wealth is created. And then a lot of that capital gets poured back into our local community in the form of angel investment, the funding and founding of new companies. You don't see as much of that when out-of-state companies are involved, but I do think there is something to be said for showing these firms, often from the East Coast and the West Coast, what we're doing here, and that we've got a thriving business community, a thriving entrepreneurial community. And a lot of really smart people, world-class universities. And there's a lot to love about Indiana.
Tyler, I wanted to ask you about your decision, first of all, to kind of sell your company to Guru just a little bit further, because some people in the tech community really have religion about, kind of building up a company for the long term. And other people are really almost looking for that exit even as they launch their startup. And I wondered what your mindset was and how difficult was it? Because a lot of entrepreneurs say that company's kind of like their baby in a way. Was it difficult to let Vertex go or not for you?
I don't feel like I let it go personally. I think it would be the simple answer to that. I feel like it was an opportunity, for the team, and to work on more of what we love to work on. We were working on a variety of different projects in different industries. None of them we were as passionate about as what we were doing with Greenlight. And so, was that what I set out to do in the beginning? Honestly, no. I had figured that we would continue to grow the business and productize additional solutions and grow, much like you're saying. But opportunity knocked, and it was the right time.
So how would you overall, and you touched on this a little bit in your previous answer with Rebecca, but how would you overall characterize the health of Indiana's tech and startup ecosystem at this point?
Yeah, I think things just keep getting better. I look back to, at the beginning of my career, granted, I didn't know, I wasn't plugged in to the entrepreneurial ecosystem at that point. And so there are a lot of blind spots, I think, to what was going on at that point. But, say for the last 10 years, having been very plugged in and engaged, it is getting better. It's getting easier for new companies to raise friends and family funds and seed level funds. I would like to see a little bit more locally led A and B round VC funding, but overall, I think it keeps getting better. I was actually just at the Elevate Kinetic conference back on Tuesday, and I was just really blown away with not just the number, but the diversity of companies that were being represented, the types of solutions that they're bringing forth. Everything from highly innovative medical device and biotech solutions to marketing technology and things of that sort. Granted, I'd like to start to see a little bit more things like robotics and semiconductors getting started here, but I think that's in the works. That's going to be happening.
Tyler, I wanted to just kind of delve into your past a little bit here with a couple of questions. Before I do that, I should note that Tyler and I basically have the same academic pedigree. And by that, I mean, we both graduated from Southport High School. Now, Tyler entered college when he was 15, graduated when he was 19, took some PhD courses along the way. And I, on the other hand, took the 4.5-year path through Indiana University. But that aside, I'm going to stick with the fact that Tyler and I have pretty much the same academic pedigree. So let me go back a little bit more recent past. And during the IBJ Power Breakfast in 2020, you were asked if Indianapolis could aspire to the level of San Francisco or New York in terms of its tech ecosystem. And you flatly said no, which I thought was kind of a refreshing answer. We get a fair amount of cheerleading in these types of questions, but you kind of gave an honest and refreshing answer to that question, I thought. So what were the reasons behind your answer? And is that necessarily a bad thing?
No, it's definitely not a bad thing. My thinking on this is really informed by my long-term research in network science and economics. So really the study of how do social networks and by extension business networks grow and evolve over time. There's a principle that's really one of the core principles behind how social networks evolve. It's called preferential attachment. That's more commonly known as the rich get richer phenomenon. It's the compounding effect of success following success, that places that have been in the game longer, who have had more established success, are going to continue to have that. They're going to tend to continue to have that. That doesn't mean that our own ecosystem here is not going to grow and thrive over time. But it's going to happen proportionally, right? It's going to take longer to compound into that level of success. But as a general rule, systems that are governed by preferential attachment, which all social type networks are, they don't tend to get more uniform over time, meaning the wealth does not spread out evenly. There's a tendency to aggregate in the long run. And so rather than trying to run away from that fact, I think it's perfectly okay to accept it and then focus on the levers that we do have, which in my opinion is quality over quantity.
I was curious, Tyler, do you think that mindset of focusing on the quality and not aspiring to those levels that really, for those two locations, San Francisco or New York, that really aren't necessarily attainable for us, is that really taken hold with others in the tech community and other sort of decision makers yet?
I don't think so, but I think they're not necessarily thinking about it from the same vantage point. But I think having a lot of cheerleaders and a lot of people that are really optimistic and positive is never a bad thing. So as long as we end up in a place where we continue to thrive, companies are still formed, they're funded. We continue to have world-class universities. I think things will continue to evolve in a positive way.
Tyler, before you started Vertex, you worked for marketing tech firm DemandJump, who was headed at the time by Christopher Day, who has been in the news recently. He took the top job at Elevate Ventures. So what do you think Christopher brings to Elevate, and how important is Elevate for Indiana tech startups?
I think Elevate really plays a singular role in the tech ecosystem, and with Christopher, having sat on both sides of the table as both a successful serial entrepreneur and operator, but also an investment banker and an angel investor himself. he knows this domain inside and out. I cannot think of anybody who's, a better fit for this role from the perspective of, his passion and talent. I think we can really expect great things from him. I didn't go to DemandJump to learn more math. I went to DemandJump to work with Toph. I consider it my MBA. So amazing leader, great friend, and the energy and enthusiasm that he brought to DemandJump, he brings a fraction of that to Elevate. I think that he's going to be wildly successful.
Tyler, you've also described yourself as an investor. How did you get into investing, and what advice would you give to people interested in investing, particularly in tech startups and scale-ups, which can be tricky?
Well, for mathematicians, investing and quantitative investing is a little bit of a white whale, right? I think it's a sort of really attractive idea that you can just through thinking and the application of mathematics develop competitive trading strategies, which result in a long-term compounding advantage. So in that regard, I've been doing quantitative investing for the better part of 10 years. And that's an area that I'm very passionate about. And frankly, I could see myself starting, a quant fund at some point in the future. On the angel investing side of things, that's come about more in the last probably 5 or 6 years, and really through the form of equity advisory work. And so rather than, just investing capital, which I do at this point, but when I was just getting started, I would work with the early stage companies and basically trade time and knowledge about AI for equity and make the investment in that form. And so, I think that's another area where the network effects are really important. And having good connections with people who are working on interesting projects. I'm a big believer, from an investment standpoint, in the idea of staying within your circle of competence, and so and really only investing in things that you understand inside and out. And so, I tend to gravitate towards companies that are doing meaningful things with AI or data science. So that's where I feel that I have an edge, and I can also provide the most useful feedback to help guide those companies in a useful way.
I may be the only one who doesn't know, but what is quantitative investing?
So that is basically writing computer software and algorithms to take in signals from multiple sources and use that to make automated trading decisions. One of the most successful, actually not one of the most successful quantitative hedge fund in history, it's averaged 60% annualized returns for 40 years. Started off with something pretty similar. You don't need you certainly benefit from number crunching, but it's the math, I believe, is just as important as the infrastructure.
Now, a quick word about our sponsor. The Talent Resource Navigator is a new free online tool that offers the convenience of one-stop shopping for education and job training opportunities. Supported by on-demand customer service and technical assistance, the Navigator intentionally guides and connects individuals and employers with a tailored set of talent development resources based on each user's identified needs. Details at talentresourcenavigator.com. Tyler, let's continue talking a little bit about capital. There was a time when most of the tech investing was really on the West and East Coast. Is raising capital for tech startups here in Indiana still somewhat of a challenge?
Yeah, I think so. But going back to our earlier discussion about Elevate and Christopher, taking over there, I think we can expect that to greatly improve in the coming years. Generally, it's not that hard if you have if you're plugged into the tech community, at least, in order to get seed level funding here. But for those larger A and B rounds, people are still getting on airplanes for the most part to do that, to close those deals.
We talked earlier about your role with DemandJump. In fact, there you were the chief architect for their artificial intelligence software. I believe when you're only in your late 20s, 27, something like that. Yeah. So you obviously have found a place in Indiana to grow and flourish professionally before you even went out on your own with companies. Do you think the state is doing enough right now to sort of retain that top talent, and what more could be done to sort of stifle that brain drain?
I think there is some room for improvement here, but I also look at programs like the Tech Point Extern program and the Orr Fellowship, which are doing a great job of bringing in people from outside Indiana. I don't know what the exact ratios are there of net import, but those types of programs I think are really essential for for engaging early career talent. But I look at the universities and I look at the incentives that they have from a funding and policy standpoint. You look at a lot of universities like to tout not only graduation rates but salary, starting salaries and average mid-career salaries and things like that. I would like to see something like their net import ratio to be a first order metric as well. Particularly, we look at IU Bloomington, Purdue, Notre Dame. They're attracting students from all over the world and faculty from all over the world. But by and large, the majority of those folks who come in from other places, they go back to where they came from, or they go to California, or they go to New York. I think we can do a little bit more by changing the incentives in order to get them to stay. There's an old saying, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. I'm a big believer in that. And so I think it might be worth a look at that because that's really where we're going to get the most. That's our greatest opportunity, in my opinion, for us to bring in new talent and grow our overall pool.
Also related to workforce, I know you've been pretty adamant in the past that the tech sector, whether it's on a national scale or here in Indiana, really needs to do a better job at diversifying. Has that begun to change in the last few years, or in what ways steps can be taken where we can get more minorities in the field and really also into those management positions?
Yeah. So I'm certainly not an expert on this, but I do think about it a lot. Companies are still struggling with this, but I do think that they're being a lot more intentional and trying, and they're aware of the problem, right? And so, but I do believe that it's unrealistic to expect big changes on short time scales. Things like this could realistically take a generation. You might be able to measure aspects of diversity in a statistical way, right? So you could look at the relative, composition of a tech company or the tech ecosystem in terms of, different racial and, ethnic groups. But there isn't really a well-defined statistic, or at least a broadly accepted statistic for the idea of inclusion, which I think is frankly more important, and where a lot of the effort really needs to be placed, because that's where we have more levers. I think we can't change population demographics, right? Those change on much slower timescales. So that problem of the inputs of having more qualified candidates, that's something that needs to be addressed at the level of K through 12 education, frankly. But in the tech community, I think we can do a lot more on the standpoint of inclusion. There's another concept from network science, which I think is really relevant here. It's called assortativity. It's basically a measure of how within social networks, how groups of like people tend to cluster together, and the degree to which people that are like each other tend to cluster together within a network. So I think we could use techniques like that to actually give us a quantitative measure of how inclusive a company is, in terms of, let's say it's you think of the company as like a micro social network. And the connections are based upon collaboration, reporting structure, leadership, board membership, things of that sort. And so I think thinking about it in a network way opens up some other possibilities, and opens us up to some different strategies that we might try. There's a saying that your network is your net worth, which is absolutely true. I mentioned earlier this Orr Fellowship program. If you look at going back, I think for probably 20 years about at this point that the program has been around, and if you look at how successful the alumni of that program have been on the whole, it's really phenomenal. And the secret to that success is twofold. One, you're taking young kids right out of school, and you're giving them direct access to executive leadership and mentorship. But there's also a heavy community building component to this as well, where as a community, the OR fellows get together, they have parties, they have events, they work together, they collaborate in charity, in a charitable capacity as well. Those bonds last a lifetime. I think that we can look toward perhaps creating an analog of that, but that's very tactically focused on working with people from more diverse communities. And the way that if we did that, and those folks who matriculate through that program, that they are going to go on to leadership positions and in other companies, particularly other tech companies. They're going to go on to start other tech companies, and when they do that, they're more likely to know more people like them and bring them along too, right? And so, but simultaneously having access to that established professional network, so being able to bridge their personal, family, local community with the community, that they gained through this, professional development experience. I think that over the course of 10 or 15 years, I think it completely changed the way that our ecosystem looks today, and it's going to compound like crazy in the long run. And as a general rule, I like systems that compound.
Tyler, from your perspective, I'm curious, from an outsider looking in, when I started reporting on, when I became a tech reporter, that was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, it seemed like the tech industry was maybe a little bit behind in diversification. And I have no idea why that is. But the events that I went to, the big events that I went to, looked awfully white and awfully male. And I just wanted to know your perspective. Do you think that tech is in the middle of the curve? Are they behind on this issue? Where is the industry on this issue in relationship to other industries?
Sure. So I do believe that as a whole, the tech community tends to be significantly more progressive and conscientious about social issues overall. And that's not just issues of diversity. I think that's issues of climate and a lot of other issues of social importance today. I go back to as I go to a lot of these same tech events, right? I think the origin of that is very little to do with the nature of the tech industry, and it's that K through 12 to college pipeline that I don't believe that there are enough candidates making it into those 4-year computer science degree programs in order to apply for these jobs. So if we're going to really change things in the long run, I think it has to start at the level of education, creating more equitable opportunities earlier in life, and also creating more exposure. I think one thing that does come to mind, I do think as a tech community we could be more proactive earlier in the process. So trying to expose kids from diverse communities to what's out there. What are the jobs in the tech industry? Because they're not all just programming, right? There's marketing, there's product, there's sales. There's so many opportunities they're not strictly technical roles, but they're within, but they're in companies that are primarily engaged in the tech industry. So I do think that we could do more on that front. But in general, the K through 12 pipeline, I think, has to be fixed. But while that's happening, adopting this mentorship model, like the kind of an analog of the OR fellowship, doing something like that, I think would be a really proactive way in order to build that layer of senior leadership, so that as kids from diverse communities are coming through college and looking for opportunities, there's going to be more people waiting on the other end with jobs.
But I wanted to go back to something Rebecca asked about earlier with respect to investment. I think I understood you to say that startups here could likely get friends and family funding and seed funding, but for A and B round funding, they would need to go out of state, need to probably go to one of the coasts. Is that correct?
Certainly with B, and to a good extent, true with A as well.
Because that would seem to be like a huge issue for startups and scale ups. Is that an issue, or is that just standard practice?
Well, those are the money centers, right? That's where the majority of funds have been established, and that's kind of going back to what we talked about earlier. This concept of preferential attachment. The VCs tend to flock to Palo Alto and San Francisco, and those areas because other VCs are out there too, right? And so there's a follow-on effect. But the more big exits that happen here, and in companies that stay here, I do believe that we'll see an increasing number of locally run and managed funds, which should change that in the long run. So is it concerning that that companies still have to often go out of town in order to secure those larger fundraising rounds? Yes. I would be a lot more concerned though if companies from here were not able to get funded, and that's high quality companies with a compelling offer and competitive advantage and strong team, they're going to get funded.
Yeah, and we do seem to have a growing track record of companies like Scale Computing and others who have gone to the East and the West Coast and gotten pretty big rounds of money. So let me get us back on track, Tyler. I'm sorry. In your work, you've also dealt with artificial intelligence or AI, which is set to really transform industry and government with computer systems performing tasks previously needing human intelligence. So where is that field headed, and how do Indiana companies play into that? And are people going to be put out of work by AI? Of course, everybody wants to know that.
I don't think people are necessarily going to be put out of work. I think that aspects and nature of work in certain roles might change or evolve over time. But I think that's going to be like a frog boiling in water, right? It's going to happen slowly. But in general, going back to something I said, touched on earlier, is that the tooling and the infrastructure to develop AI solutions, or to integrate AI type features into a product that might not be an AI first, meaning it's AI software, like the types of things that Vertex did. But marketing technology software or medical device software that leverages AI in some capacity. The ability now for a smart software engineer, but who doesn't necessarily have a really deeply technical background in mathematics or theoretical computer science, the ability for them to get something working and more or less having abstracted a lot of the internals is getting better and better. And granted, I'm a little old-fashioned in that I think that you should generally understand how the math works at a pretty deep level before you try to bake it into your product, if for no other reason than if something goes wrong. So imagine debugging. You find bugs in software. It's a whole heck of a lot harder to do it when the bug is in an algorithm that you don't understand versus some more commodity software. So. But in general, I think that trend is going to continue to be a catalyst where we are going to see more and more companies develop more value-add solutions by using AI as an assist as part of a more comprehensive software offering.
So what I really want to ask next is, when are we most likely to see the reality of Rosie from the Jetsons come to life? So what I will ask you is, where are the most likely next applications for AI, or in what devices are they most likely to be used in it, and in what way?
Some of the most impressive advancements that I've seen and also professionally leveraged have been in the area of natural language processing. So that's the subfield within AI that's dedicated to using algorithms to extract knowledge and to understand written text and communication. This is a much bigger problem than one might think. Most of the world's data is trapped in the form of written text documents. This is actually central to the work that we're doing at Greenlight, where there are millions and millions of documents that are published through disclosures that are required by law via the FDA. That every time a medical device is approved, documents which substantiate that product's safety and efficacy and all the things that could go wrong with it, and the regulatory standards they have to follow. All that information is typically typed up in a PDF report, and it's made available on a server. But there isn't a clean database anywhere that might say help an emerging medical device company figure out, okay, what did these, I'm trying to make a new pacemaker, for instance. So what did all the other companies who currently have pacemakers on the market, how did they do it? What were the risk factors that they had to worry about? What are the things that could go wrong with the device? And what are the things that could go wrong with the person? All of that's neatly typed up in these notes, but there isn't just a simple, clean database to find that information anywhere. And so we can use these very advanced natural language processing AI techniques in order to extract those facts, organize that, and then make that useful. I kind of like to joke that we're creating the Google of the medical device industry in that sense. But there's just a lot of that. That's a really popular technique. It's certainly gaining a wide scale adoption within the marketing technology industry. We did a lot of that at DemandJump as well. So that just keeps getting better and better. There are also a number of really stunning advancements that have been happening in image analysis and in realistic image generation, where with text-based prompts, so you could and you can find there's some open tools on the internet that so look up DALL-E or Stable Diffusion. And there are a couple of websites where you can type in a prompt and be something crazy like, a cat riding a horse wearing a cowboy hat or something like that. And the algorithm can actually generate those images, and they're photorealistic. It's absolutely amazing. Those haven't found, I'd say, direct commercial application yet, but that's coming. I can envision a time where, an author might write a script for a movie, and those algorithms can render the video.
Don't tell my bosses at the chamber, Tyler, but there's a company actually here in Indiana that has pioneered a program, an AI program that writes news stories. And so a little known fact is that about 3/4 of game stories, just game reported stories that you see, are written by an AI program that has just taken the box score, analyzed it, and written the story, which I think is fascinating. And of course, we do a much different kind of story writing in BizVoice, so I think I'm safe. But I just think that's a fascinating direction in the way that this technology can go.
Yeah, it certainly is. I didn't know that about sports, but it's certainly been true for quite a while in finance reporting. So anytime there's a press release or significant stock movement, sites like MarketWatch are typically algorithmically generating most of those stories, just because the world's moving so fast, right? There aren't enough reporters in the world, I think, to cover everything that's going on in the finance industry.
I was curious to ask you what other innovative technologies are emerging that could help serve the broader business community.
Yeah, some of the things that I'm really interested in. So things like wearables. So devices that you can wear. The most popular of which right now is the Apple Watch, but there are things like the continuous glucose monitors, like the Dexcom monitors, which people have continuously, either they're wearing them or they're implanted, which provide biofeedback, which can help individuals and physicians make better healthcare decisions. I think things like that are going to continue to get more and more prominent and more powerful over time. Related to that, I'm really bullish on the work in genomics, and we've seen the work with the COVID vaccines that was able to leverage these technologies of high-speed sequencing, which 20 years ago it cost $1 billion to sequence a full genome. We can do it now for less than $1,000. So the ability to leverage those technologies to create highly personalized medicines, in order to, particularly to target things like cancer, to do gene therapy, is really just mind-boggling. That's another area I would personally like to learn a little bit more about. And I think the third one, which right now it's still very much in its infancy, but I think will continue to evolve as computers get faster and smaller, is augmented reality and virtual reality. So I think there's certainly others, but those are the big three that stand out in my mind right now.
I wanted to touch on is public policy. What actions do you think could perhaps better foster or spur activities in the innovative technology or investor spaces?
Yeah. So again, I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to policy, but never been short on opinions either. So like I said earlier, the old saying, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome," I think is a really powerful framework for looking at a lot of these issues. The issue of how do we retain more talent, I think, is something that could be addressed with policy, with appropriate policy, and higher education. When it comes to investing, certainly things like looking at our state's tax policy around like VCI tax credits, potentially lowering state income taxes, things that continue to make Indiana a competitive environment to start and grow businesses, and to invest in businesses. So anything that achieves those objectives, I think, is worth looking into.
Before we close, what are you working on that we haven't discussed, and what might be on the horizon for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I mentioned earlier, I'm working with the team on a number of really interesting large-scale data mining and natural language processing problems that I think is going to have ultimately a really big impact on the way that companies develop safe and effective medical devices. So, very, very excited about that. And then I have a 6-month-old son and a 3.5-year-old daughter. And so that is, I'd say, my most important project right now.
As it should be. Tyler, thank you again for the conversation. We really enjoyed it and found it very informative.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it as well.
In Chamber is presented by the Talent Resource Navigator. The current edition of BizVoice magazine explores Indiana's innovation scene. Read about some of the state's most successful entrepreneurial ventures and the people behind them, and the programs and policies spurring the activity. Go to bizvoicemagazine.com. As always, thank you for listening.